And I believe that's with that, we're going to get to our Q&A. If anybody has any questions, please type them into the chat pod. You see the Q&A, type your question, and we'll monitor those and ask for them, or ask for the questions as they come in. I've got a few of my own to kind of get the conversation going as we start going across. For the Hawks, if we can talk a little bit more about the warrant relationship. I know that it was mentioned, but I really kind of want to drive this home, the difference between the MUTCD and the TEM 3.8. You know, the difference between the federal criteria and the state criteria. I believe that was Alan talking in that section. If we can talk about, you know, the relationship between those two and how you can go from one to the other.
Yeah, that's good question, Anthony. I'm glad you brought it up because you know, this kind of takes care of a lot of the questions or a lot of the thoughts about using the pedestrian hybrid beacon and in relation with a signal warrant. So again, on the MUTCD, if you bring up the MUTCD and look at the MUTCD requirements, it's guidance. The minimum thresholds and thresholds that are applicable by the charts that are shown for low speed and high speed facilities, those are guidance. I just got back from the National Traffic Control Device Pool Fund study where we were discussing this issue on a national perspective, and you know, a lot of the states are using that as guidance. It's not a shell statement, so to speak. However, the TEM is a requirement. We can actually you know, make that you know, change, or I would say improvement, not improvement, but a requirement that you'd have to have the minimum threshold of 20 pedestrian per hour. So that's really the difference between the TEM and the MUTCD. However, I do want to bring up you know, you know, as I mentioned before, there are some people, and we've seen it from the application of the PHBs, there are some people that are not understanding when the PHB goes dark, what do they do?
The driver.
You know, and yeah, I'm sorry, your driver.
Driver's perspective, right?
From a driver's perspective, yeah. Thank you, Joe. So the misunderstanding, and we still are seeing that. So you know, what we're going to do with some of the guidance in the TEM is emphasize the area in the MUTCD where it allows using the full PED signal, warrant number 4 of a full PED signal, and the options that are available there. So as many of you know, if you're a practitioner or did the signal warrants, you'll see that for the peak hour you would need at least 133 pedestrians, and for 4 hour and for the other criteria, the 70% reduction criteria, that all applies. However, that's a large number to actually provide the warrant for a signal for pedestrians, for a full signal. There is an option in the MUTCD that basically says that if the practitioner goes out there and during the engineering study and determines that the walking speed is, or the 15th percentile walking speed is less than 3.5 feet per second, you can actually reduce the number of pedestrian required 50%, by 50%. So your 133 will be half of that, which is a good option. I mean, we want to see a lesser threshold. We think that full pedestrian signal is a better application, and we want to see that. So we're going to emphasize that in our TEM. and we hope that practitioners would kind of see that. And now it's a little bit more difficult to measure the 15 percentile. Obviously, nowadays there are more advanced techniques for determining that, like cameras and stuff like that, instead of actually counting, or having a stopwatch and all that, and figuring out what the walking speed is. But we're also talking to the National Committee and seeing if there's a way where we can reduce that threshold. Hopefully that, I know I said a lot, but hopefully that's a lot of information. And just stay tuned, because we're going to have some of the criteria, as I mentioned, included in the TEM.
Those updates to the TEM, when are they expected to come out?
3.8 is under review right now, and we anticipate probably maybe by next month. Hopefully we'll get all the comments back, even from Federal Highway, and we'll publish it.
Well, now that's going to be a bulletin, right?
It'll be published with a bulletin, yes, correct. It's not our traditional annual publication dates like November. This would be a bulletin.
Great. We'll have to reach out to everyone and provide that information for them. That's soon. That's good. Before we leave the conversation with Hawks, I know that the federal guidelines allow for Hawks to be used at intersections, and the pictures, I know they're from FHWA, show them at intersections, and the TEM really calls them a mid-block treatment. What is the stance for FDOT on using Hawks at intersections?
Yeah, Anthony. So the MUTCD also is a mid-block application, and the guidance is the 100-foot separation from an intersection. So that would be, if you're going to use it at an intersection, it has to be at least 100 foot from there, from an intersection, minimum spacing. Also, not sure if the roundabout is also an option in advance of a roundabout. The MUTCD talks about the application of a PHB. And so we want to make sure that there's that separation.
Great. With curb extensions, how do we balance the smaller radius, the benefits of the smaller radius, the reduction of the vehicular speeds, and the shortening of the crossing distance with the needs of transit vehicles and large trucks? We can't just run around reducing the radius of every intersection.
Sure we can. You have to keep into account the type of vehicle that you're expecting there. In the FDM, we talk about the difference between the design vehicle and the control vehicle. And the design vehicle is the type of vehicle you'd expect to have through there every day. In most applications, that's going to be something like an SU truck, which is like a FedEx truck, something a little bit smaller than a bus. And the control vehicle is the vehicle that you might expect to have come through there occasionally, and when it does, it needs to be able to get through the intersection, perhaps with some encroachment into the opposite travel lane or into the adjacent travel lane, and you can design around that. So between those two types of vehicles, you have a range of curb radii that you can select. And so you want to have a curb radius that will work for your design vehicle, and then depending on how much room you have within the intersection for the control vehicle to get through, that'll set the other end of the range, or how big your curb radius has to be. So that's what you're normally looking for. You don't want to have a situation where you've installed so many bulb outs that you can't get a fire truck through, for instance. But at the same time, if you design it for a tractor trailer truck, then you're going to be having a lot more speed through the intersection and on the turns than you would need for automobiles. So. Sorry? Yeah, one of the options is you could have an apron on the bulb out so that folks can roll over that. Some people like that. Some folks kind of feel like they'd rather just as soon keep the trucks off the apron if pedestrians are standing there, but in some situations, yes, you can do that. We're also talking about looking at whether the intersection is elevated. Sometimes you can raise an intersection. We talked about raised crosswalks. You can raise intersections as well. and get that vertical deflection that way. So that would all fit into it as well. But as far as the curb radius itself goes, you really want to work back and forth between your design vehicle and your control vehicle.
You open it?
With crosswalk markings, should we be using contrast crosswalk markings on concrete and asphalt, or aged asphalt, or is it only to be used like on the black asphalt?
Well, yeah, so, you know, like I mentioned in the presentation, you know, you saw that one example where we had the crosswalk and it looked like it was aged asphalt, which is light colored. The idea is you would want a contrast. That, you know, we don't have any specific requirements right now for that in the FDM. However, that is just good engineering practice to have contrast on your markings. So if it is, I mean, we do have requirements in the FDM for contrast. However, not specifically for crosswalks at this time. We talked about it and we were looking at maybe modifying the FDM in that case. But for mid-block crossings, absolutely. Anytime you can highlight that pavement marking against this background, it's more beneficial for visibility.
Yeah, it's required that you have contrast, and so if you think it's not going to be there, you need to find a way to make it happen.
Right, right.
That's one of the reasons we restrict it, that the colors that you can use on the crosswalk are restricted. It's to make sure that you have sufficient contrast there.
And with detectable warning surfaces, I know there was a slide about it, but can we re-emphasize when they're used, when they're not used? I know there's a width. You know, should we be using them on median noses, at signalized crosswalks? You know, how far? When do we use the truncated dome pads in the median?
For ADA, they're always supposed to be used on either side of the median.
I'm going to pull up the slide on my end. There's a minimum requirement, though. If the median is too narrow, we don't use truncated dome pads.
While they're looking for that slide, what I'm going to do is, I know several people have already started to log off, so I'm going to open up the evaluation on everybody's end. If you could just take a few moments to complete that evaluation, as the feedback provided is not only great for our presenters, but for the Florida LTAP Center as well, as we look to identify some additional topics. Do we want to take another question while we're looking for that slide, Anthony?
Sure. The interim approval for the rectangular rapid flashing beacons, how long will it take to get that approval?
Well, that depends on federal highway, but they're pretty much giving them out, you know, as soon as the agency sends in. And by the way, you know, if agencies want to have an example of a request to use interim approval, they can contact the districts, and the districts can give them an example, or they can call me and I'll send them an example. We do keep copies of all interim approval of agencies that are sent in. Basically, Federal Highway sends us a copy. So, you know, we're not tracking them or anything like that. It's just courteous copying.
But on the state system,
on the state system, yeah. On the state system, we have to track them. And they are tracked in our e-traffic website. But off-system, the individual agency would have to track them and make sure that they have a list of their locations.
Do you want to do one more question?
Sure. With regards to lane elimination, won't eliminating lanes increase traffic congestion?
That's a very good question. Typically, that is unfortunately the general thought, but do remember that we want to make sure that we're doing lane elimination or road diets in roadways that are that have low volumes and good LOS or level of service. And typically we have found, and actually FHWA has done some outstanding research, and it's been found that there could, if there is any additional delay, it's like 5 to 7 seconds, and it's been found that drivers do not mind. So technically does not add to congestion or doesn't increase congestion. It's expected that the same volume that went through that roadway or that facility will continue to use the same facility. And one of the requirements for the project package or the documentation is to look into the traffic and how eliminating or reducing lanes can potentially impact the network. So it is not desired to add to congestion, to answer your question, but it's not expected either.
And it provides transportation options.
It provides transportation options, correct, and not only for pedestrians and bicycles, but it can also, you can accommodate transit.
Yeah, it's often been found that a lot of the trips will find other ways to travel, other ways to get around, other routes in the network, so it doesn't necessarily affect the congestion on that corridor the way you would expect it to.
I believe I have the answer to the median nose question up the slide. It looks like it's about 6 feet. If we have a median width that is 6 feet or more, we use truncated dome pads because the dome pads are 2 feet wide and we require a 2-foot landing area between the two. Any narrower than that, we do not use the dome pads in the median. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have in there the standard index. If you go to a couple of slides forward, you can see what we have in our DOT information. Yeah. So that's showing the truncated domes. Oh, go back.
Forward.
So, no, go the other direction, the one that shows the truncated domes. Yeah, so there it's showing it. My understanding is that, yeah, so this one has it at, I believe, 6 feet wide. Is that what that says there?
Yeah, 6 foot, greater than
6 feet.
Yeah, minimum 6 feet.
Okay. So, yeah, best practice, whenever you can, it's good to have the truncated domes there. So if you can get it to be, I think we don't call it a pedestrian refuge if it's not at least that wide. At that point, it's just a median.
What kind of funding is available to implement projects that include these spectacular 7-step countermeasures?
Well, from a department perspective, we've been promoting these as a best practice. We don't have any special funds set aside just for doing these improvements or the spectacular 7. It's just the right thing to do. Now, you know, in some of these bicycle pedestrian improvement needs, if we have like crash data to support the need for an improvement, then that's a different story. But basically the spectacular 7 that we showed, these are from a department's perspective the right thing to do, and we're incorporating those into our standards. So it's kind of built into projects.
I would like to add that most road diet or lane illumination projects that we have seen so far are just 3R projects or resurfacing projects that the districts or the locals see as an opportunity to do the lane illumination, since they're already going to resurface. So they take advantage of the project to do the lane illumination.
Yeah.
This is Dwayne. We have a number of different pots of money that we are able to draw from at DOT. The most important thing to making it happen is to get the scope correct as early on in the project as possible. And once you're clear what it is that you're trying to do, then usually your district work program office can go out and help you find the best way to fund that. So depending on what you're trying to do, there may be safety money that could be applied to it. It may just be resurfacing money. There may be some other kind of funding that can come into it to be used to build these things. But most of these are based on our criteria, and they're just what you should be doing when you design the roadway and when you rebuild the roadway.
We have time for 1 or 2 more questions before we go to closing remarks. Someone mentioned the mountable curbs with a bulb mount. Is that advisable? With like, how do we indicate to a pedestrian waiting at the edge of the curb to sort of watch out, because you know the trail end of a trailer might be riding over where they're standing?
Yeah, those were a technique that was developed in the 90s as a way to add a bulb out in places where you really couldn't fit one. And so what you would do is taper from the sidewalk level down to the pavement level, and the notion was that a large truck could roll over the top of that. And that would be for an example of designing for your control vehicle. Maybe you don't expect a truck like that often, but if you ever did have one come through, you would be able to roll over the top of it that way. You know, that's a decision that you would need to make on a case-by-case basis, based on where you were and what you were trying to do and what your designer was comfortable with doing. So that's my advice on that with the mountable curves. We don't necessarily show them in our standards. We just show a typical curve. And normally, yeah, we're assuming that if you're on a bulb out that we're trying to keep traffic from driving onto that thing. We do use them for roundabouts quite a bit, though. You'll have a mountable curve in the center of a roundabout. We're not expecting to have people standing. Is it up to the district whether to use special emphasis versus longitudinal crosswalk markings on minor approaches at an intersection? The FDM is pretty clear about that. We use them on the signalized legs of the intersection, and unless it's in a school zone, we normally would not use them on the minor legs or the intersecting legs based on the FDM. Again, if it's a special situation, the district can make decisions for how they would like to do that. Most of the time they're basing that on the FDM criteria, however. So that's kind of my take on it, unless somebody else has a different take on it. I think that's good. That would work. It's a good question.
I think we've covered the questions that we have in the chat. I'm going to go through one more quick section before handing it off to Joe, I believe, for closing remarks. And that's when you download your presentation, look at the end of the presentation for resources. We have a number of hyperlinks, basically all the things that we talked about during the presentation. Your everyday counts, STEP website, FHWA, the CMF Clearinghouse, the AASHTO Green Book, the MUTCD, there's a bunch of things are out here. That e-traffic website that Alan talked about is a great resource, that map. We have the traffic engineering manual, the MUTCD. You noticed when we were switching between topics, these one-page summaries. These are fantastic little write-ups that FHWA has on each of the spectacular 7 going through. Hyperlinks to those are included. Hyperlinks again to that matrix that I talked about earlier, and just more and more links. These are specific links to each of the presentations. I'm sorry, to each of the countermeasures. We have some NCHRP reports. And that's everything that I have. So Joe, if you have any closing remarks for us.
First of all, great job. Excellent. Everybody that participated today, I do appreciate your time. A lot of information put out in a short amount of time. So just to kind of highlight, Everyday Counts is a national initiative from FHWA. As Alan mentioned, we're as a DOT, we're in the institutional phase of this effort. And so what we're trying to do with these webinars is really make all of our public partners aware of what we're doing, and to encourage them to basically at least look at the standards, if not adopt them for their local agencies. So we will be doing more webinars. Part of this process is really educating everyone really on the right questions to ask. I think when Anthony was bringing up that last table, I think that was really good because it gets to that point of, what are the options? What are some questions to ask, both to be at the department or even at a local agency? So I really do value all your time and participating on this webinar. We've teamed up with the Local Technical Assistance Program at Qatar for the registration, and so we will be reaching out to you, to make you aware of future webinars on this topic. And once again, just want to thank you for your time and effort for this event.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Anthony, and everybody for the great presentation. Again, I know I had previously opened the evaluation. If you haven't had an opportunity to complete the evaluation, I'll go ahead and open that again for you. Do take a few moments to complete the very, very short survey. Again, this webinar has been recorded, and we'll get that posted and sent out to everybody as soon as it is available. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.